Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my 2022 LCS Spring Split Power Rankings, and I am very excited about this. This is the last in my Power Rankings series because LCS starts so much later than every other region. If you are interested in any of my other Power Rankings, my LEC, my LCK, my LPL, even my NA Academy, they are on my channel. They're going to be linked up in the iCard right now. The playlist for all of those is going to be linked up in the iCard right now. I implore you to go check that out. You can kind of get a baseline for how I tend to grade players and how I tend to grade teams overall. But yeah, let's jump into this. A little bit of ground rules. We've had quite a bit to already see from these teams. Very similar to the LPL in that we get a full tournament of these teams before we kick off. In the LPL, of course, it's Demacia Cup, and then here in NA, it is Lock-In. So, Lock-In has already happened. Lock-In has kind of affected my power rankings, but honestly, maybe not as much as some other people. I'm still going to rely a lot on my individual scouting of these players from years past to kind of determine where I think they will land in a grand scheme of things. But Lock-In obviously did change a few things in terms of player rankings and things like that. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to be going from number 10 to number 1 in my power rankings, going from the worst to first, kind of going over how I feel about all 5 players, how I feel about their outlook in general, and then, some highs and lows with that roster. So if you guys are excited, please go ahead and leave a like. Let me know down in the comment section which rosters you guys are most excited for going into the year. And without further ado, let's just jump right into my number 10 team in my power rankings. Unfortunately, somebody had to be last, and for me, that is unfortunately going to be FlyQuest. So FlyQuest comes in 10th. Like I said, very unfortunately. If you are new to my videos, let me go ahead and explain what you are seeing up on your screen right now. In the middle, you'll see the team name, how they finished in spring, how they finished in summer. They're both their record and their standings. I will say for the summer record, it is just their record in summer. Obviously, last year in the LCS, records were cumulative, but it still felt quite different because there was a mid-season tournament, so I did decide to separate the spring and the summer records. And then on the left, you'll see a power ranking with a number. That's where I personally power rank the teams. On the right, I polled a lot of people in my Discord. Actually, this is by far the biggest sample size that I've had so far. A lot of people in my Discord to give me their power rankings of the LCS. Some were before or in the middle of Lock-In, and some were after Lock-In, just by nature of when people got back to me. So that is something to keep in mind. But honestly, that's kind of a breadth of, ranking that I'm looking forward to. Because, before Lock-In still is a decent analysis of teams, quote-unquote, in the preseason, right? So you'll see that number aggregated in the number outside the parentheses, in this case 10 for FlyQuest, and then you will see their highest placement and their lowest placement in those. So somebody placed them as high as 8th, and somebody placed them obviously as low as 10th. Then you will see all 5 of the starting players with a number next to their name. That number denotes where I power rank them in terms of their position. Now keep this in mind. Please, please, please keep this in mind. This is very important. Some positions in the LCS and in the league in general are just deeper than others. So, theoretically, the 7th or 8th best mid laner might be just as good as the 4th or 5th best top laner, right? Just because mid is a deeper position in terms of talent. Just because the number is bigger doesn't necessarily mean that the player is worse unless it's at that exact position. And I'll go over all that at the end. But yeah, I think that's all the housekeeping out of the way. Let's jump right into my analysis of FlyQuest. Their lineup from top to support is looking like Kumo in the top lane, Jose Deodo in the jungle, Takuya in the mid lane, Johnson and Avramu reunited here in the bot lane. Also, I should note, if you see a star next to anybody's name, that just denotes that they are considered an import. That's kind of important, but also I think most people here probably know who the imports are. So, yeah, this team is interesting. I actually think for a 10th place team, and for a team that is considered last, I think I haven't been able to really say this in any of the other power ranking videos, but this is like the best 10th place team in relation to the rest of the teams, I think, in the league. FlyQuest is actually decently competitive, and I could definitely see a world in which they heavily outperform this 10th place ranking and go, shoot up to, like, playoffs even, right? Well, I guess playoffs is 8, but, like, top 6. We'll say top 6, right, is playoffs, quote-unquote, because, those are the teams that probably deserve to make playoffs. But yeah, I can see FlyQuest actually jumping high out of this 10th spot. A lot of that positivity comes to me from the bot lane here reuniting. Johnson and Aframu were so good on Dignitas 2 years ago. Obviously, Johnson comes to FlyQuest last year. Aframu stays on Dignitas. Afra actually has a pretty good year on Dig. Johnson was really good in lane and then just kind of forgot how to team fight, which is not a great sign, but it is what it is. I think you reunite these two. Johnson has a propensity for a great laning phase. Aframu is one of the best support team fighters in the region still. And I think this bot lane could actually be really, really good. Just like they were in 2020. Are they going to be good enough to propel this team out of 10th? Maybe. If this is like a top 4, like 3 to 4 bot lane in the LCS, which I think at its peak it absolutely could be, then maybe. Maybe they absolutely, yeah, like, if they're that good, then this FlyQuest team probably isn't 10th with how important bot lane is right now. But just, there are a lot of good bot lanes in the LCS this year. I think a lot of teams ended up building around that. And unfortunately for FlyQuest, they just don't have the supporting talent around it, in my opinion, to really match some of what the other teams who do have really strong bot lanes are doing, even if their bot lane might be a little bit more experienced than some of the ones I put higher than them. The other member of this team that I'm relatively excited about is going to be Takuya in the mid lane. He was obviously playing in the LFL last year. He was the LFL MVP. A lot of people forget that. He was really, really good last year for, I believe it was Gamers Origin. And the tape I watched of him, he is pretty explosive, right? He's a very flashy mid player. And I think that that could be really good paired up with a very flashy jungler here in Jose Deodo, who kind of lost a little bit of that edge as the season went on last year. But obviously, we know Jose Deodo as someone who likes to make the big play. And, you know, I think if you pair up a jungle and mid who both are kind of looking to make big plays, sometimes that can work really well. You can create a really explosive chemistry. And Takuya's also just got fantastic mechanics. Really, the big question with him is he going to acclimate himself to NA and to this team quickly? Because while we know he's a really mechanically talented player, he really hasn't had much success in terms of winning at any point in his career. Mostly because he's quite clearly been the best player on his team pretty much everywhere he's been. So, is that going to be the same here at FlyQuest? You know, you're looking at a really rough top side of the map. Can mid and bot kind of supplant that? Maybe. I do think this roster has the talent to be able to kind of push for something like that, but some things are going to have to go right, and one of those things that has to go right is Jose Deodo really taking a step up from where he was last year. He was someone who I thought was pretty good in Latin America before he came over, joined FlyQuest last year in a pretty big move, and I thought he was not good last year. I don't think that there was a lot to celebrate when it came to Jose's play in 2021. He was, to me, easily the weakest jungler in the region. Like, even if you're including, like, Iconic and, you know, some of the other junglers that may not even be in the LCS anymore, I thought Jose played weaker than all of them last year, whether or not he's a worse player. He really has a lot to show that he's capable of playing at a level that is LCS, like, ready. Because he just didn't show it last year. He wanted to come in and you know, fire up really quick, and this team didn't get off to a very hot start at all. In fact, they got off to a pretty slow start. And so much so that he ended up defaulting, I think, a lot to some more safer picks, which I think is just not his playstyle and not something that we want to see out of him. If he can get really good at those safe picks, you know, I could really like a supportive jungler just feeding into a mid laner. You know, I think that could be a playstyle that works if he wants to go full support. But if he's going to do that, he really has to get better at being a supportive jungler, because right now, he basically plays like an aggressive jungler without picking aggressive jungler picks. And that is just kind of a recipe for disaster, so he definitely needs to step up. And then Kumo in the top lane. Kumo is a prospect that I was really high on for a long time in Academy, you know, whether he was League, whether he was Shiro, especially like on the Cloud9 Academy days. He was really, really solid for them. Goes over to EG, kind of loses a little bit of that luster, is here on FlyQuest now, ends up, you know, becoming the full-time starter in top lane here after Licorice leaves and, you know, after last year, right? I don't see it in Kumo. I think he's easily the worst top laner in the LCS, at least going into the year, right? I think he doesn't really offer you too much aggression or, you know, outplay potential or mechanical, unbelievable skill. A lot of what he does is very coordinated and teamfight oriented, at least it was last year. Picks like the Aatrox come to mind, especially for Kumo. So I'm not exactly sure that this is going to be a positive for the team. In fact, I think when you're looking at like the top side of the map, like Kumo, Jose, and then Takuya maybe early, like I could see this being a really big weakness for the team. And that's why they fall into this 10th place spot. I think when it comes to weaknesses in the LCS, this just seems like the biggest outlier is this top side of the map that just doesn't seem like it will be all that good. I think it's going to really be a lot on this bot lane to carry. And as you can see, I have Johnson as the 8th ranked AD carry. I think there are a lot of good AD carries in the region this year. And unfortunately, like if they're going to kind of make it out of this spot, that bot lane's going to have to carry. So I'm just not super positive about their chances, but theoretically speaking, they have the talent. Like I said, bot lane's good. Takuya was really good last year. And then Jose Deoto's been really good in the past. And even if Kumo is kind of a weakness, I don't really expect him to grow too much at this point in his career. If you have the other 4 players kind of growing and stepping out of that shell, I think this team could be a lot better than the 10th place ranking that I have them in. Moving on to my number 9 team in the power rankings, and this one might upset quite a few people, might shock a few people, but my number 9 is going to be Dignitas here. They had a great lock-in, do not get me wrong. This core absolutely looked great in lock-in, a lot better than I think I have them projected here, but I'll get into why I maybe believe that might not be a full season's worth of belief coming from Dignitas. But let's go over what their roster is looking like from top to support. You got Fake God returning in the top lane, River coming over in the jungle, Blue in the mid lane, Neo at AD carry, and then Biofrost at support. Let's get the positives out of the way first. River was phenomenal in Lock-In. I mean, he was like one of the best junglers in the LCS level in Lock-In. He's been like that in the PCS. He's been the best jungler, in my opinion, in the PCS. Him and Kong Yue can kind of fight over that, but River, I think, has been the best jungler in the PCS for what, over a year now? A year, 2 years? He's been really, really good. Comes over here to Dignitas. I actually was pretty positive about this move in my offseason analysis, and I think that kind of showed up here in Lock-In, at least. He was really, really, really good in Lock-In, carrying this team really far. Honestly, their Triad core I thought was really good. And part of that Triad core is actually going to be Blue in the mid lane. And yes, I have Blue listed as the 10th ranked mid laner, but you got to keep in mind, mid lane in the LCS is just such a stacked position. I would say that Blue is probably a better player than someone like Fake God. I would say actually they're probably relatively even, because I like Fake God a lot as well, but I would say they're relatively even though Blue is listed at like 10, think of him as like 6 or 7 in like top laner terms. You know, I think Blue is a good player, and I think he gets a lot of flack. He looked pretty good in Lock-In, but he was really good in Turkey, what, 2 years ago now? Not that long ago. And honestly, if you look back at the track record of players from Turkey kind of going to major regions and, you know, being good, like when you're the star player in Turkey, typically you can be a pretty good player in a major region. Turkey is a region that produces really high-level talent. And so to say that Blue doesn't have the capability of being that good, I think is just not true. I think it's whether or not he can unlock that potential. Obviously, working with his former coach here in Enetron on Dignitas could help a lot. And he looked good in Lock-In. So if we're going to get the best version of Blue, I can see this team maybe exceeding this power ranking. I definitely think, you know, if you follow this channel at all, you'll know I think that mid-jungle duo is the most important part of the map right now. And I think River and Blue as a combo could really work. It's just about the consistency that I think you're going to get out of Blue. That was the biggest problem I had, even in Turkey or with him last year as well, is that he'll have really good games. He'll have games where he looks like the best mid laner in his region, and then he'll have games that are just bad. Like his bad games aren't just him being invisible, they're him being actively detrimental to his team. And so I think the consistency really just needs to step up for Blue. But River, I think, can help him with that as somebody who is really aggressive, but also is good at just kind of playing for late game. I think River as a support is just, as a jungler, is just someone that is just really, really good for someone like Blue to have, where he can either follow, or if Blue's having a good game, you know, River can kind of take a step back and Blue can take the lead. I think this is a very malleable duo here, and I think that's really good for the team. The other two members that are returning, I should say, for Dignitas, Fake God and Neo, I'm pretty high on. Fake God, I've always been high on. I've you know, in Academy last year, if you watched my videos from last year, you'll know I was very high on Fake God. I was basically begging some team to pick him up out of Academy and give him a shot in the LCS, and Dignitas did, and he came in and he proved me right. He was really, really good, especially in Spring. Him and Neo actually were both really good as rookies in Spring. But Fake God, you know, he's not the most aggressive top laner in the world. He's not the one that's going to go out there and, like, win you lane and, like, dominate and carry game. But he is very stable, and he very rarely loses lane, and he's a really, really good team fighter. And I think that that's really good when you have a very proactive jungler or a mid laner that likes to take more risks. And then a bot lane that is also probably going to be looking to get more attention this year. Neo was pretty good last year. He definitely fell off in summer. There's really no other way to put it. He had a really good spring. He was not good at all in summer. Hopefully you're going to be getting the good version of Neo this year. That's unfortunately the reason he ranks so low. Also, there's just so many good bot laners in the LCS. Like, he ranks just below, like, Johnson and Lost, who, in my opinion, are both clearly better than him. And he's still at 9, right? Like, it's just ridiculous how good bot lane is in the LCS right now. But Neo is just kind of, he's very hit or miss, and he's good with resources, and I think that's why he did so well in spring, was there were a lot of resources kind of dedicated to him by jungle, by mid lane, honestly, last year, with Saligo roaming a lot in spring. You change the roster around a bit in summer, you bring in Akadi, and you bring in Yasui. You're starting to play a lot through mid lane, and I think Neo falls off a little bit without having that pressure side of the map kind of there. We'll see if that can, you know, he looked good in lock-in, but we'll see if that can continue with blue all year long. And then you bring in Biofrost here at support. I wasn't super big on the Biofrost pickup here. I think last time we saw him in the LCS, he was kind of a mid to bottom tier support. I think the support pool, at least, you know, relatively has gotten weaker since then. So theoretically, you would think that someone like Biofrost could come in and be, you know, mid-table at the very least at his position. I think that that's totally capable. I'm just worried about this bot lane as a duo because Neo is someone who's shown that he's not really necessarily the best on his own. And he was playing with one of the best supports in the region last year in Aphromoo. You bring in my opinion, what is easily a downgrade there in Biofrost. And you just worry a little bit with how that bot lane is actually going to coexist. Overall, I think Dignitas is a decent team. Consensus has him a little bit higher at 8. Somebody had him as high as 5. That one was obviously post-lock-in. And then someone had them as low as 10. I actually originally had this team as my 10th place team before lock-in. But lock-in, they were just too good. They're clearly going to be better than FlyQuest. I think even at their worst, they're probably better than FlyQuest. So to me, they jump up to 9. But like I said, I think anybody from like, I've talked about this, and a lot of people have talked about this, I think, at length. The LCS is split into 2 halves. The top 5, I think, are the top 5, right? And if you can break into that, great for you, but I just don't think most teams are likely to break into that. And then the bottom 5 are like the bottom 5, but I think the bottom 5 are all relatively similar in terms of skill level. And that means 10 could very easily finish 6th, in my opinion, or 9 could finish 6th, and vice versa, right? Like, I think in any order like that, I think this is just how, you know, my shot in the dark and how I think they'll finish. Could Dignitas finish 6th? Absolutely. And honestly, if they play like they did in lock-in, they might finish higher than that. They were really, really good. But I'm not going to throw my dart in on the consistency of that. Overall, I think if this team is going to win, it's going to need to be through jungle playing really well and probably giving a lot of attention to bot lane so that Neo can get ahead. Hopefully, Blue can just outplay mid laners and be really mechanically talented like he was in the TCL. Not so much in the LEC last year, but everybody has bad years. Hopefully, it just doesn't carry over into another one. And then Fake God's really consistent in the top lane. I think that's a recipe for success. It's just about whether or not Dignitas is going to be able to execute on that. Moving on to my number 8 team in my power rankings. It is the young and upcoming Counter Logic Gaming CLG coming in at number 8 here. I really like this roster. I really like the direction that they're going in. Obviously, they retooled basically their entire organization this year. Not only the players, but the staff as well. This is a very new look CLG. I think it's been a long time coming that they just do a huge overhaul like this. And honestly, I'm very, very happy with the direction that they are going in now. But let's go over what the roster is looking like from top to support. You've got Jenkins in the top lane, Contracts in the jungle, Palafox in the mid lane, and then Luger and Poom as your bot lane. Very, very fun roster here. A lot to like, honestly. A lot to like. Let's start with the things to like the most, which is what has to be the bot lane. And mostly Luger, who is just too freaking good to be in Academy still. And so he's not. He's up here on CLG. It's crazy because CLG now has the 2 best Academy bot laners in their organization from last year. They have Luger here on the main roster, and then Prismal is now unfortunately just stuck in Academy because he's going to be behind Luger. But Luger's really, really freaking good. 6 might honestly be way too low, but I had a little bit of trouble putting him ahead of people like Tactical or Berserker. And yeah, a little bit of spoiler, those guys are above him, but I mean, he very well could be like the third best AD carry in the region right now. I just want to see it. I want to see it, you know, before I crown him that. But if in 2 weeks' time he's dominating, like, yeah, he was higher than this, right? He has the potential to be like the number 1, number 2, like FBI level AD carry in this region. I just don't know if I'm willing to crown him on that yet, but he is really good. You're bringing in his support from Academy here. Both of them played on 100 Academy last year. Poom comes up. Poom is someone that we've seen in the LCS before with 100 Thieves. And he was honestly decent for 100 Thieves when he came up to LCS, even though he was like super inexperienced at the time. He has a little bit more experience under his belt now, but you know, I think this bot lane looked really, really good, obviously, in Academy last year. They dominated the Proving Ground circuit at the end of the year. It really wasn't even that close. They were easily the best bot lane in the Proving Ground circuit. And I'm glad to see them getting their shot here at the LCS level. I think there's a chance this could be like a top 3 to 4 bot lane right now in the LCS. It's hard for me to say that just because there's so many bot lanes that I think have good potential, quote unquote, that I don't know which one is really going to realize it, but could CLG be one of them? Absolutely. Like, absolutely they could. The other positives on this team are honestly the mid lane. I'm really high on Palafox. I think that he's a good player. I think he got a little shortchanged last year. Him and Triple were splitting a lot of time on FlyQuest, and they're going to be splitting time, I guess, theoretically on CLG this year, but with Triple still being here behind him. But Palafox is the better player. He played like the better player. He's had a great start to the year in Academy, filling in for Triple, who's just not in the country yet, but honestly, Palafox is a good player. He ranks it as a decent mid laner. I don't think he's a world beater. And honestly, I think a lot of people are kind of expecting him to be a world beater. I don't think he has that kind of potential. I think theoretically, him and Poom probably have the lowest ceiling of any of the players, like of this like really young Academy, you know, developmental group. I think Palafox has just got a high floor, right? He's a really good mid laner, and he's probably going to be a really good mid laner. You know, he's stable, I think, which is good when you have a jungler like Contracts who loves to take crazy risks. Contracts actually had a really strong end of the year last year on Evil Geniuses, coming in and kind of playing better than Svenskeren for the end of the year there. I expect him to come in and be kind of the focal point of the early game for the CLG team. He likes to take a lot of risks early. This is a guy who every year he's been in the LCS has led the league in deaths, or at least every year he's like full-time been in the LCS, he's led the league in deaths. I would expect his playstyle to not change too much on this team, because there are a lot of people who like to play aggressive. You have a mid laner here who loves to shove and roam, and I think that's going to be really good for Contracts overall. He's an incredibly talented, aggressive player. I compare him a lot to Dardoch. I think they have very similar playstyles. Contracts, however, doesn't make quite the level of errors that Dardoch does traditionally. He did when he was first in the league, but I think he's really honed in on some of those errors now. I just don't necessarily think he's like the big showboaty pop-off player that Dardoch was. I think he's a really, really good jungler and has the potential to be top half here in the LCS, but again, just like with the rest of this roster, I'm going to have to see it here. And then Jenkins comes in the top lane, who I think was actually criminally underrated last year. He came in and replaced Alfari and got a lot of people mad. He didn't look super good in the LCS when he did, but he dominated Academy. He was easily one of the best Academy top laners, if not the best Academy top laner last year. He was just really, really, really good. And I'm really glad he's getting a shot here. I think a lot of people kind of were sour on him just because he was, quote-unquote, replacing Alfari, and I think a lot of that had to do less with Alfari being bad and more with Jenkins just having such a ridiculous year last year in Academy. I'm really glad to see him getting that shot. He's a more aggressive player. He loves the Kennen pick, obviously. That's his thing. But picks like that, you know, picks like engaged champions, I think, like, you know, the Aatrox in the past have been good for him. But I think even in this meta, you know, more quote-unquote useful picks like the Gwen, I think are things that Jenkins seems to be really, really proficient on, I would say. I expect this roster to outperform expectations. I think consensus has them as high as 7, which I think is fair. As low as 10, I would definitely not go 10 with them. I think they are too good to be 10th. They are certainly going to be better than at least one team in the league, just because the floor of players like Palafox and Luger and Contracts and Poom, I think, is just higher than something like a FlyQuest or even a Dignitas, really. But I think their ceiling is honestly really high as well. Luger and Poom could be dominant here in the bot lane, and if you're getting like a really strong jungle and a top lane that can really hold his own out of this, I think this could be a top 6 team easily. So, you know, fingers crossed. I would, you know, selfishly speaking, I would love if this team was just like randomly really good, right? Like top 5 levels of good. I think that would be so good for the NA ecosystem if you can bring in a team of Academy players and have them really compete at a high level with LCS talent. I think that would show that Academy isn't just a waste of time, and that's kind of the message I think everybody who really cares about LCS is trying to get across right now, is that you need to invest in Academy more so than a lot of these teams have in the past to develop some stars of the future. We've seen it work out with people like Blabber, with people like Spica. You know, hopefully we can see some more on the CLG team in the future. But yeah, you know, selfishly, I hope this team does really, really well going into this next season. Moving on to my 7th place team, my last team that just barely finishes out of the top 6 here, and that is unfortunately going to be Golden Guardians, finishing at 7 here. I know some people are going to be surprised at who ends up making it into the top 6 there, but for me, Golden Guardians coming in here at 7, I really like the outlook of this roster, and you want to make a case that they're much higher than this? Clearly some of the consensus did, but it's hard for me to argue with that, but they do have some weaknesses as well. Let's go over what their roster is looking like. In the top lane, it's Licorice. In the jungle, it's Pride Stalker. I believe he's going by Pride now. I don't know. I'm putting Pride because I think that's what he's going by, but it could be Pride Stalker. In the mid lane, it's a Blaze Olive. AD carry is Lost, and then support is Ole. This is a roster full of potential. Full of potentially good right now players. I think you've just kind of... I think the best way I can put it is Golden Guardians has taken a group that at the beginning of last year we were like, these are a lot of players that I think are kind of underrated at their team. And they've made a team out of them, right? You've got Licorice coming in, you know, from C9 formerly, but FlyQuest last year, who wasn't doing so hot, but Licorice was still playing well. You've got Lost coming in from TSM, who, yeah, TSM was doing really well, but Lost, everybody was kind of claiming that Lost was kind of the quote-unquote weak member of that team. And then a Blaze Olive, you know, had a really underrated good year for this Golden Guardians team last year. Obviously, Licorice on GG last year was good as well, but, you know, Blaze Olive the full year, I think, was really good. Really what you're looking at with, like, positives for this roster is you could make a really hard case that outside of the top 5, these are the best this is the best solo lane duo of any team that we've talked about so far. And, I think there's definitely a case that, you know, they're better than some of the teams in the top 5, you know, as well. But this solo lane duo is really, really solid. Licorice had a really good last year, even on FlyQuest when he wasn't, like, dominant. Comes over to Golden Guardians, finds his form pretty much immediately, and is back to being one of the better top laners in the region. And then Blaze Olive, what a year last year. He was sneakily one of the best mid laners in the entire region last year. No one cared, because no one watched Golden Guardians, but Blaze Olive was really, really good. Better than Licorice even. Unfortunately, he falls at 6 because, like I said, mid lane's a hard position to crack. Yeah, he was solid, and I think he's only gonna get better, right? This is a guy who I was really high on when he first came into the scene. You know, when you go back to Scouting Grounds and you go back to him on TSM Academy, like, this is a guy that I thought was going to be a really, really big impact player in the LCS one day. I kind of fell off on him for a little while with how he was playing in Academy for TSM. Comes over to Golden Guardians, and I mean, you know, he's kind of realizing the promise that I think me and a lot of other people had for him in the mid lane. He's really good. Licorice is really good. Those two are really good. We talk about Lost as well, who I thought had a really underrated last year as well on TSM. We have to forget, this is the bot laner for the team that finished first in the regular season last year. That kind of player usually is considered pretty strong. Unfortunately, Lost just kind of, you know, lost a little bit of reputation. Not to, you know, make no pun intended. But he comes over to Golden Guardians here, a team that is kind of notorious for OS ADCs. And, you know, hopefully he can kind of be that guy that I think a lot of people expected him to be when he came up from Academy last year. Because in Academy, it was always like him and King as these two OS AD carries that are just way too good to be in Academy. He got a shot last year, and honestly, I thought he played well enough, obviously, for that team to finish first in the regular season. Yes, they kind of fizzled out a little bit in playoffs, but Lost had a good season. And honestly, with what we're seeing out of Sword Art now in the LPL, which is to say not seeing him at all, like him not even being a starter in the LPL, I think maybe, you know, we can say that Sword Art had a little bit of a worse season than we maybe necessarily said, which is what I was saying all of last year, right? But you talk about the two new players here to the LCS, quote-unquote new. We'll talk with one that's returning first in Ole. Returning here to the LCS, he took a year off of competitive last year. I know he was in game design for a little bit, and then kind of went back to climbing the Korean solo queue ladder, ended up 3rd on the Korean solo queue ladder, which is nuts. But again, this is a guy who took a year off competitive after the year before that, somebody who was honestly just phased out of the team that he was on, and I believe it was Golden Guardians. I believe he was phased out of Golden Guardians with FBI, and then replaced with Huhi because he was really struggling. He had a really good start to the year. I remember he was playing almost exclusively Tahm Kench, and then everybody started banning Tahm Kench against him, and then he couldn't play anymore. So, hopefully Ole has grown a lot since then. It's hard for me to project him any higher than this, because the last time we saw him wasn't very good. And so it's hard for me to project him as higher than 9, but we have to remember this is a former LCS champion on Team Liquid. He's been to MSI, he's been to Worlds with both Immortals and Liquid. He has a lot of experience, and he, at one point, was considered the best support in the LCS, so it's not like he has had no track record. He's just been quite poor in recent memory, but getting top 3 on the Korean solo queue ladder is pretty nuts, and obviously we know his mechanics have always been good, so hopefully he can find some synergy here with Lost. And then the big wild card, I think, for this Golden Guardians team, as to whether or not they're going to be better than expected or not, is going to be Pride here in the jungle. I have them a little bit lower. A lot of people are really, really hyped on Pride coming in here from the EU Masters scene, the ERLs. He was pretty good last year, but honestly, I'm not nearly as high on Pride as I think a lot of other people are. I think it's a good pickup here for Golden Guardians. I think he definitely is somebody who has shown the capability of being good, but I don't know if he's going to be like a top 5, 6 jungler in the LCS in year 1 or ever. I don't see that same kind of potential in him that I think some other people do. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe, we could see him linking up with someone like a Blaze Olive and being really good, supporting that bot lane, being really good. Even supporting Licorice in the top lane, who's always done well with resources. I think, honestly, you have a team that is really open to options here when it comes to, as a jungler, where you want to go with your time and with your resources and where you want to put a lot of the gold into. I think there are a lot of options on this team, and I think that's going to help Pride out a lot. I just haven't necessarily seen it from him personally, as much as maybe some other people have that are hyping him up. I do think he's a major upgrade here to Iconic either way. Iconic has really been struggling in Academy, and even, he was struggling in Lock-In as well. Pride is going to be an upgrade to that, and this team is certainly going to be better than what they were last year. It's just about the cohesion, right? This team is going to want to play through their carries, which are, in my opinion, the top and mid. Even though mid is theoretically more of like that supportive, push and roam style mid, which I think a Blaze Olive does really well. I think that does kind of benefit this team because you have a guy in top lane that you're happy to roam to in Licorice and a bot lane that you're happy to roam to in Lost and Ole. I think Blaze Olive is going to be a huge part of this team if him and Pride can kind of link up. I think they're going to be really good. And then obviously, if bot lane can gel, that's going to be huge, huge for this team, because if you're getting the loss that we kind of expected to get when he was coming out of Academy last year, I think that's really positive. And then, if Ole can kind of get back to a really good form, they could be a pretty solid bot lane here. And this Golden Guardians team could definitely be a lot better than 7. Consensus has him 6th, as high as 4, which I think is like, that is like absolute best case scenario. If they finish in the top 4, that is a miracle season for GGS. And as low as 10. Some people have them as the worst team, which I don't see. I think their floor is just so much higher than every team that we've talked about up to this point. I think like the difference between the floor of all 3 teams that we've talked about and the floor of Golden Guardians is just wildly different. But do I think this team could finish as high as 4? Probably not. Do I think this team could finish 6th and maybe even in a miracle season like 5th? Yes. Like I think they definitely have the talent to do so. It's just about, like I said with the others, whether or not all the pieces come together, whether or not you're finally getting that next step up from your young stars. That brings us to our playoff teams. For the first of these playoff teams, coming in at number 6, and in my opinion, the best of that bottom, 5 group of teams is going to be Immortals. And yes, this is going to shock a lot of people because they shit the bed in Lock-In, and that's just true, right? They were awful in Lock-In. They didn't win a single game. They were not competitive in any of the games. They didn't look good at all in any way, but there's just too much talent on this team for me to consider them that low. So, let's talk about who they do have from top to support. They have Revenge in the top lane, Xerxes in the jungle, Power of Evil in the mid lane, Wild Turtle at AD carry, and then Destiny at support. There's a lot of good on this team. The good has to start with PoE though, right? This is the big reason why I have this team 6th. And I know that sounds weird, but think about PoE and think about PoE's history. This guy does not miss playoffs. ever since that Optic season where they were like 2 games above 500 and still missed playoffs, which was absurd in the first place, right? He goes to CLG. The last time CLG was good, PoE was on that team. They finished like top 3 in the region. He goes to FlyQuest. FlyQuest is second, and they do pretty well at Worlds. Goes to TSM, best team in the regular season last year. He has a ridiculous track record of going to teams and those teams being good, even when they're not projected to be the best teams. That CLG team wasn't exactly projected to be unbelievable. That FlyQuest team certainly wasn't. I remember a lot of people were putting them 9th, 10th, whatever, right? You can go back and check my video. I had them in the playoffs. I was high on that team, so not to brag. You humble brag there. And then last year with TSM, nobody had them as the best team in the regular season. No one saw that coming, so PoE obviously always outdoes expectations, and he's a big reason why I have this Immortals team. In playoffs, he's simply just too good to not be in it. He's the 3rd best mid laner in the entire region. You could make the argument that he is the best at certain points. He just doesn't have the play style that is particularly flexible or show-offy or, at times, proactive. I don't know how else to say it. PoE can sometimes be a little safe in lane. We all know it. We all know who PoE is. But he is a really good player, and he's a phenomenal team fighter. And that's really what PoE does extremely well. And you pair him up with some really good talent here. You have Xerxes in the jungle, who had a really good year last year. He was phenomenal in the jungle last year. And yes, 7 might look a little bit low, but of course, the top whatever of this list is just really, really crowded. River just jumped above him. I had Xerxes above River before lock-in, but River just jumped above him after that awesome lock-in performance. But Xerxes is still a really, really good jungler. Again, another guy who's a little bit passive in my opinion. Definitely someone who looks to play a little safer in the early game and then kind of scale up and then carry in the late game. That style can be good, and sometimes good styles between mid and jungle can, matching styles can be good. Sometimes that can be a problem because you don't have a ton of early game presence, but, this team is going to be really good in team fights. That we know. PoE, Xerxes, and then Revenge are all people that I would consider like quote-unquote team fighters, right? Revenge is also decent in lane, but he makes a lot of mistakes early as well. But I want to talk about Destiny as well, someone who had a really, really underrated year last year. Destiny was really solid in 2021. Obviously, everybody remembers him from his days on Origin, and, him and Xerxes on that same team, them absolutely flaming out, him being a huge disappointment coming into the LEC. He gets another shot here in the LCS, and he was phenomenal last year. Him and Raze were secretly one of the best bot lanes in the LCS last year, and I think a lot of that was just due to how well Destiny played. He is one of the most consistent supports in the region. He just does everything well. He has a good laning phase. He's a good team fighter. He gets really good vision control. He can roam really well. Pretty much everything that you want out of support, Destiny does decently well. He's good on engaged supports. He's good on enchanters. He doesn't really have a huge flaw in his game. I think he's a huge asset to this Immortals team. So, yeah, those 3 players for me are the reason that this team is in 6th. I think those 3 as a core are just really strong. Xerxes, PoE, and Destiny. You put those 3 on a team, and it's really hard to convince me that that team is not a playoff team, right? But you are looking at flaws outside of that. You're looking at Revenge in the top lane, who's someone I've never been particularly, super high in on. I think he has really good mechanical skill, but he doesn't have the best sense of, turning that into a macro lead for not only his team, but for himself in lane. He can sometimes be overextended when his jungler is not on that side of the map and when they don't have pressure. He can sometimes be a little bit too aggressive, die solo in lane, or die to a gank. He's particularly susceptible to ganks, in my opinion, more so than almost any other top laner in the region. And then also while I said he was a good team fighter, and he has mechanically a really good team fighter, he sometimes can get a little over-aggressive in team fights and die a little bit before his team is ready, especially on flanks. That's something that we've seen from him, but like I said, he is really mechanically talented, and sometimes he's just, good enough to pull off, ridiculous plays even when they're not the best play to make at the moment. And then you have Wild Turtle in the bot lane. What to say about Wild Turtle? God, he was awful last year, and he was awful in lock-in. It's really not the best sign. Wild Turtle is, however, someone who goes through these spurts of he'll be really, really bad for a little bit, and then he'll come back and he'll be fine. Right, and you reunite him with Power of Evil, from the FlyQuest days. Theoretically, Wild Turtle can be better than this, right? But I don't know. I don't have a ton of confidence in Wild Turtle. You do have Arrow down in Academy, And Arrow had a really strong start to Academy. He's falling off a little bit now, but he had a really strong start to Academy. There is a really, really realistic world in which Arrow right now is just better than Wild Turtle. And for those wondering, yes, Arrow is, you know, he's not an import. He's he counts as an NA player, so you wouldn't need to change anything else to bring Arrow up. And I think there's a real opportunity for Arrow to just kind of be the better player from day one. So if Wild Turtle struggles, I could see Arrow coming up. And Arrow could be pretty good. Honestly, a former LCS MVP, obviously. So, you know, someone who has experience at the LCS level. But, you know, we're talking about Wild Turtle right now. And Wild Turtle is probably a big reason why I'm a little bit down on this team. He has not been good recently. But theoretically, Destiny can hopefully kind of bring him to play a little bit better. He did that with Raze last year. Although I think Raze is better than Wild Turtle. You know, he did it with Raze last year. He made Raze look really good. And I think, you know, hopefully, if you're an Immortals fan, you're kind of hoping that he can do the same thing with Wild Turtle. He can get back to that FlyQuest form rather than that CLG form from last year. But yeah, if you're looking at the positives for this team, it's the core three. It's PoE, Xerxes, and Destiny. The consensus has them at 7. I totally understand them not being in the top 6. As high as 6, as low as 10, which I get. They had a horrible lock-in. They were the 10th best team at lock-in, period. But I think they're going to be better than that. And I actually have them as a top 6 team. Just because that triad core of Power of Evil, Xerxes, and Destiny is simply too good for me to count out. Jumping into the top 5 now, we are going over the top 5 teams in the LCS according to my power rankings. At the bottom of that top 5, for me personally, it is going to be TSM, Team SoloMid, coming in at 5th. Let's go over their roster from top to support. You've got Huni in the top lane, Spica in the jungle, Kuaiduo, I believe is how you say it, in the mid lane, Tactical at AD carry, and then Shenyi at support. Obviously, they went and scouted the LPL, or the LDL, I should say, finding some good young talent, bringing them in, and kind of hoping to get to them before the LPL does. I think it's a decent strategy, and I'm really interested in it. We'll see if it pays off for him, but let's talk about the members of the team I'm a little more excited about. First, we'll start with Spica in the jungle, the reigning MVP of the LCS. Some people are going to be really, really mad that I have him as the 4th ranked jungler, but I don't know. I think jungle as a position is just kind of variance-wise, really, really high variance. And while Spica had a really good regular season, he was the reason that this team was number 1 in the regular season last year. Don't get it twisted. He was the reason. He did not have a great playoff. He actually got outplayed by some other junglers that I have on this list in the playoffs. I don't know. To me, he just has... I'm a little bit lower on Spica than I am on some of the other young, up-and-coming, strong junglers in the region that are inhabiting the top 4 of this list. But, you know, that doesn't mean he's not a great player, and it doesn't mean he's not the best player on this TSM team. And if this team is going to outperform its ranking, it is certainly going to be off the back of Spica being unbelievable like he was last year. The other really good player on this team, and great addition to me here, is Tactical. Coming in here, him obviously returning to TSM, formerly on TSM Academy. Obviously getting that time on TL a long time ago, replacing Doublelift. Now he gets his chance here on TSM with a little bit of a different looking team, but he's been a really, really good player for the past few years. Yes, his laning phase does leave a little bit to be desired. Core has kind of carried him in laning phase for the past few years, but you want to talk about team fight mechanics? Tactical has team fight mechanics. He is one of the best, if not the best team fighter in the region. It's just kind of what he does, right? He is unparalleled when he's in the zone in team fights. It is just, he's unbelievable to watch. He can win any team fight by himself if you give him that option. Very similar to a player we'll be talking about in the same role a little bit later. But, yeah, he's a really good player. I have nothing but good things to say about Tactical. I would argue that he, at this point in his career, is rather underrated because I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about him as a young and up-and-coming star. When you have players like FBI and Danny in the same role as him, I think Tactical can kind of get shoved under the radar a little bit. But Tactical is a really, really good player. And then we talk about Huni, who is returning here in the top lane. Huni's fine. He's definitely not the Huni that we have seen in the past. He's not Fnatic Huni. He's not Immortals Huni. He's not Echo Fox Huni. Hell, he's not even Clutch Gaming Huni anymore. He's just kind of a mid-tier top laner. Someone who kind of sticks to his own game plan, his own play style. Doesn't necessarily win you the game, but isn't necessarily going to lose you the game. Just a very generic, kind of safe top laner at this point in his career. Your big storylines here are coming from your 2 LDL imports, Shenyi and Kuaiduo. We'll talk about Shenyi first because I'm a lot more excited about Shenyi coming in here. Shenyi is someone who I think fits the NA playstyle rather well, of someone who likes to gain pressure in lane and then roam a lot. Picks like Rakan have been really successful for him. Picks like Thresh have been really successful for him. I think that his playstyle is honestly going to make him one of the better NA supports almost immediately. You know, I liked what I saw out of him, not only in the LPL, or in the LDL, but in the LPL when he got his small chance on FPX as well. His tape is good. I wouldn't say it's like revolutionary, right? I wasn't looking at that tape thinking like, oh my god, if an NA team got this player, he'd be one of the best players in the region immediately. But, you know, he's a good player. And I think he's definitely going to help this team kind of get to where they want to go. He's not going to hinder where they want to go. Where I'm a little bit more confused is Kuaiduo here in the mid lane. Obviously, they've seen stuff in scrims that, you know, that's the disclaimer I'll put out, is their scrim results are not public. I'm not going to be able to judge what he's done in scrims. I can only judge what I've seen him do on Thunder Talk Young, TTY, from last year. But last year, he was just not someone who particularly impressed me on Thunder Talk Young. He was very passive, and I think that's a little bit concerning to me. He was someone who was willing to kind of take no resources and not dominate and, you know, lose lane by a little bit, by like 5 or 10 CS in order to get to late game, and then he was fine in the late game. But that's not something that jumps out to me as like, whoa, let's get this guy over immediately. Like, he was fine. He was okay. He was never the focal point of Thunder Talk Young. And, you know, it is what it is. When you're in a developmental league like that, and when you're getting signed into a major region, I want you to look like the guy on your team, and he just didn't. So I'm a little bit, you know, more hesitant on ranking him. That's why he comes in at 9th for me, because really I haven't seen it on tape of him being this dominant player. But, you know, obviously they've seen something that I haven't. They've seen the mechanics a little more than he maybe showed off in the LDL when he wasn't the focal point. Maybe they see that he, you know, could be the focal point. And if he is given those, you know, opportunities that he can make good on them. But just so far, I haven't seen it personally. So, you know, hopefully there is stuff in there that, you know, could be better. You know, could kind of prove me wrong. But right now, I just haven't seen it. But for TSM, their ceiling is high, quote unquote. I don't know. Spica's really good when he's on. When he's like, the best version of Spica is great. The best version of Tactical is great. And then if you hit on Shenyi and Kuaiduo, this team could be really good. Huni being kind of a stable force in the top lane, this team could be really good. I just think they definitely have the smallest chance of reaching it out of the top 5 teams, in my opinion. I think, you know, Spica's really the only member of this team I'm super confident in. Tactical a little bit as well, but his laning phase is still kind of weak. And Shenyi has never been the type to, like, make your laning phase better. He wants to roam, so... and then if your solo lanes here are going to be not strengths, you know, I think that could be a little bit of an issue for this team. Consensus has them at 4, actually, higher than another team up here. As high as 4, as low as 6. So we do see them kind of in that variant stage. I have them right in the middle there at 5, but I think this is probably a lot closer to where I expect them to come in the regular season. Closer to 5 than something like 3 or 2 in the long run. Jumping into the top 4 here for the LCS. This is where we really start to get to the point where I think any team from here on out, I think, could realistically win the LCS spring split. I think the top 3, maybe a little bit more so comfortably, but I think anybody from here on out, in my opinion, could, you know, if they won the spring split, I wouldn't be overly surprised. So coming in at number 4 for me is going to be Cloud9. A lot to talk about with this team. Obviously, so many fun storylines in the offseason with this one. But let's go over their roster. You've got Summit in the top lane, Blabber in the jungle, Fudge role swapping here to the mid lane, Berserker as the AD carry, and then Winsome coming in as the support. A lot of really interesting things to talk about. A lot of changes for this Cloud9 team. Pretty much all off the back of the new head coach, LS. If you don't know who LS is, I don't know where you've been for the past, like, 4 months, if you've been under a rock, I don't know, but, yes, influencer, commentator, you know, build extraordinaire, LS has joined Cloud9 as their new head coach. He's brought a lot of his staff with him, brought a lot of his players with him. Pretty much everybody on this team, not only in the first team, but the academy team as well, is someone that LS has handpicked to be a part of this organization and a part of the growing process here, so... it'll be interesting to see how this works. Obviously, LS has a very particular style that he likes to go with. I'm not going to go into that situation too much here because it's been documented to death everywhere else on the internet. There are plenty of other videos you could watch about that. I'm here to give my opinion about how this team is going to finish. But, yes, my opinion. Let's talk about some of the players here. Let's start with the player that I am in some people's opinion, unreasonably high on, and that is Blabber in the jungle, who I do think is the best jungler in North America. I think some people are going to be really upset by that, but golly, he had an unbelievable World Championships. There's really no other way to put it, right? The thing with Blabber for me has always been he plays so well domestically, and then he goes international and just can't seem to find his footing. Well, whatever happened in 2021, he needs to keep that, because he played really, really well at the World Championships. He is probably the reason that this team made it out of groups. He was the best player on C9 at Worlds. And, I think that form is going to... If that was his biggest problem, right? He's, in my opinion, always been the best domestic jungler. At least in terms of performance. If he's going to be the best domestic jungler in terms of performance and not have that international drawback, I mean, it's a no-brainer number one for me. He's the best talent NA has produced since Doublelift, right? Like, he is the guy in the LCS, in my opinion. Some people are going to be mad it's not Spica. Some people are going to be mad it's not, like, Inspired or Closer. But for me, it's Blabber, right? That's who it is. I think talking about the other positives, Summit. You bring in Summit here. I think that's a huge get. I do agree with the idea that Summit might be a little overhyped by the community after last year, but if you're not thinking that Summit is the best top laner in the LCS, he's probably at least top, 2 or top 3. Top lane is just a very weak position in the LCS in general, and Summit's going to come in and be number 1 for me immediately. He has the ability to carry. You can put him on someone that requires a lot of resources. You could spend a lot of time top lane, and he's going to reward you for that, but he's also really good at playing low resource. He always has been on Sandbox, kind of coming up through that system. He's kind of been the guy on Sandbox, when they first came into the LCK, and, last year as well, when they kind of shocked the world and made playoffs. Now we're kind of seeing it a little bit. Everybody thought, oh, Krako was really good last year, and oh, Fate was really good last year. And yes, those guys were good last year, but man, you take Summit away from them, and both of them are kind of struggling a little bit in the LCK this year. So Summit here, I think, is a really, really solid player. Just kind of gives that backbone, that spine of solidity to this team overall. And then you keep Fudge here as well, role swapping from top to mid to make the Summit transaction work. Fudge didn't have a particularly impressive showing at lock-in in the mid lane. He kind of got gapped in lane, and that's kind of what you're worried about with Fudge, right, is the laning phase. That was kind of his weak point in top lane, and now he's going to a position where he doesn't have the laning, acumen, or the laning experience, I should say. Laning phase is definitely something I'm worried about with Fudge. I'm not so much worried about him in team fights. I think he was a great team fighter on C9 in the top lane, and I think you transition him now to playing things like control mages or even assassins. Like, I don't expect him to really fall off that hard when it comes to team fights. Really, where I'm concerned with Fudge is he going to be able to hold up against the best mid laners in the region in lane? And that's definitely something that's going to be determined. So hopefully he can hold up to that. But, Fudge is a really mechanically talented player. I imagine he'll be able to pull it off. And then, obviously, the big acquisition this offseason, the big young acquisition, is Berserker here in the bot lane, which I think is a really, really good pickup. This is a guy who, if he were promoted to the T1, senior team last year, I don't think anyone would have been super surprised. Unfortunately, he was just stuck behind Gumayushi, who's just too good, right? But Berserker is disgustingly good. He is actually disgustingly good. His mechanics are unbelievable. His team fighting is great. His laning is great. He does everything great. There's a chance that he is the best AD carry in the region right now, but there are some holes in his game, most notably the consistency, at least for me. And honestly, I think a big worry for me is going to be how he's going to pair up with someone like Winsome, who I have a lot of major question marks about. But Berserker on his own is a fantastic player. And then Winsome coming in here at support. This is, the most confusing move of the offseason for sure. At least for me, because this is a guy that we have very, very little tape on, honestly, overall. This is a guy who was playing the 3rd tier of Korea last year, and now he's coming to start on an LCS team, one of the top 5 LCS teams, nonetheless. Obviously, LS has seen something in him that shows that he is going to be he really trusts this guy to come in and be good from day one, but we've seen almost nothing from him, and the things that we have seen from him have been fine. You're watching him in the tier 3 of Korea last year, and you're like, yeah, he's probably good for this region. He's probably good for this level. He probably is a borderline academy, Korea player, but does that mean that he's good enough to be in the LCS right now for one of the top 4 teams? That we're going to have to wait and see. I'm not high on Winsome from what I've seen. He's fine. He's okay, at least at an academy level. If he was coming in to play for an academy team, I'd be like, okay, yeah, that's pretty solid. But he's coming in to start for this LCS team from day one, and that is definitely a concern for me overall. So looking at this team and the outlook generally speaking, I think they have a lot of talent, especially on this top side of the map. I mean, Blabber and Summit together, Blabber, Summit, and Berserker, like, mechanically speaking, as a trio, should carry this team to at least 4th, in my opinion. I think they are too good to be anything less than that. If Fudge can really get the laning down, they could be higher, but I do think Fudge and Winsome are definitely the big question marks on this team, where they're going to really have to step up if this team really wants to achieve its dream of making world, they want to make world semifinals, world quarterfinals, not just make worlds. And right now, making worlds, I think, will be a little bit of an uphill battle for this team in general. But the consensus has them actually at 5th, even lower than me, as high as 4th, as low as 6th. So, some people that are a little bit questionable with the LS style in general here. I think it can work. We're just going to have to wait and see if some of those question marks, mainly Winsome, are going to pan out, or if, Blabber, Summit, Berserker, Fudge are good enough to just carry this team into a Worlds position. Moving on to the top 3 teams. Now, this is where we're really starting to get into the conversation of these 3 teams are really, really good, and any of them, honestly, could be favorites to win the LCS Spring Split, but this is just how I personally power rank them. Coming in at number 3 for me is going to be Evil Geniuses. They look really, really good, and man, I'm really excited about this roster in general, but let's go over who they have. Impact in the top lane, Inspired coming in the jungle, my boy Jojo Pyun coming in the mid lane, Danny at AD carry, and then Vulcan at support. This is just your perfect young NA team that can grow together. I love everything about this team. Like, I just love everything about this roster and how it is constructed. This is like an A+ offseason, in my opinion. Let's talk about the players that are returning. There are 2 returning players here. Impact in the top lane. What is there to say about Impact that hasn't been said already? You could argue that he had his best year in North America last year in 2021, or at least his most aggressive year. He was given a lot of resources, really for the first time in his career in NA. Like, really, especially ever since, like, the NRG, like, Team Impulse days. Impact has really always been a supportive player on, like, Cloud9 and TL, and he comes over to EG here, gets resources last year, and looks phenomenal. He does really, really, really well with them. He's my 2nd-ranked top laner, only behind Summit. I think he's a really solid top laner, and someone that I think fits into almost every single team that you could ever possibly conceive in this region. And then you're bringing back Danny. Danny, the Rookie of the Year last year here for Evil Geniuses. I made a statement in my offseason analysis video that I truly believe that Danny is like a sneaky favorite for MVP this year, and I think that that could hold up. This guy is a team-fighting god. He just, if you get him into a scenario where he's even going into a team fight, he's going to win you that team fight. His weakness is laning phase, and it always will be laning phase, but you bring in a really, really good laning phase support here in Vulcan, arguably the best laning phase support in the entire region, coming in from Cloud9 here. This is the perfect matchup for me. I'm so excited to watch this bot lane work. 2 really young North American talents working together. One that is kind of going to be the anchor in laning phase, one that is going to carry your team in team fights. I love this combination of bot lane players. Both of them are really, really good all-pro caliber players. And then you bring in Inspired in the jungle. Don't forget, this was the MVP in the LEC last year. He was really good for a rogue team that, yes, disappointed at playoffs and disappointed at Worlds, but, I mean, they were first in the regular season for a reason. This guy knows how to get leads. They had a little bit of a trouble holding on to them, but I think when it comes to macro on this team, I'm honestly not too concerned when you have guys like Impact and Vulcan, who are both known for having really, really solid macro. Even if Inspired, quote-unquote, was the problem, I think that's something that isn't going to be nearly as much of an issue on this team, with so many different voices kind of coming in. And then, oh boy, and then we get to talk about Jojo Pyun, who was the Chovy of Academy last year. That's how I worded it. And I think that's a very apt description. He was so much mechanically better than everyone he played against in Academy last year that I really don't even know how good his macro skills are, or his late game skills, because I can't remember a time where he went into a late game last year without a gigantic lead. He's that much better than everyone in lane. And then he shows up in lock-in, and he proves it again. His laning phase is ludicrously good. He is such a strong point of the map for players like Inspired and Vulcan to play around that I honestly am not concerned at all about him not having experience here. I think he's going to come into the league pretty much immediately and be one of the better mid laners. I have him at 4th. And honestly, he could be number 1 by the end of the year. It really is that. He has that kind of potential. I think JoJo is a phenomenal decision here for Evil Geniuses. I praised them for going in the JoJo direction instead of something like Jensen in the offseason because I think JoJo is just going to be an absolute stud. And I love to see him getting his chance. I think he's going to be, like him and Danny, I think are like the perfect duo, right? Because JoJo is so strong in the early game that you can spend a lot of resources there to get him ahead. And then Danny just dominates so hard in the late game that even if he doesn't have those resources, even if you're allocating them to someone like JoJo in the early game, he's still going to be really, really, really good in team fights. I think this team is going to take the league by storm, and they could really finish as high as number 1. And honestly, I would love that. I think bias fully intended here. I would absolutely love if this team won spring, summer, everything, right? Because I think the mentality of let's build around our young North American players is something that I think everybody who's a fan of North American League of Legends can get behind. So, yeah, the consensus has them at 3 as well, as high as 2, as low as 3. So, a lot of promise and potential on this team, a lot of hype surrounding this Evil Geniuses roster. I just hope that they can live up to it. That brings us to our top 2 teams. Which one's going to be number 1? Which one's going to be number 2? That's what I bet you're all waiting for, so I'll cut the suspense now. This is kind of a reveal for both. So, coming in at number 2 in my power rankings is going to be 100 Thieves, your reigning LCS champions, coming in at number 2 here. I'll go over their roster from top to support, although, do I even need to? Because it's the exact same as last year. You got Someday in the top lane, Closer in the jungle, Abadage in the mid lane, FBI, and Hui as your bot lane. This lineup's too good, man. It's a cheat code. Somehow they were able to keep all 5 of their members. I think that's awesome. They don't need to upgrade anywhere, honestly. They have a top 3 to 4 player in every single role, and some of these players could be higher than that, right? I don't have anybody on there listed as number 1, and I think that's kind of the biggest problem they have is I don't think they have any superstar level player unless Abadage really kind of takes that crown this year. But for me, this team is just too consistent, too good, week in and week out, game in and game out, to consider them anything lower than second. Let's talk about the positives. I say, as everybody on this team is a positive, but this team likes to play through bot lane. FBI and Huhi were the best bot lane in North America last year. I don't even think that is really that disputable. They were dominant in lane. That's really what they do, right? Is their laning phase is so ridiculously good that by the time they get to late game, even though FBI still can struggle in that situation at least a little bit, their early game is just too good. Huhi's roams are unbelievable, which helps out both Closer and especially Abadage, who also has a really good early game. Closer has a really great early game. I would say Closer's first 4 minutes of the game is better than any jungler in the LCS. He just knows how to control the map and to take away stuff from his opponent without getting punished for it. He has a really good, really, really good map understanding, and it really helps the team out a lot. But yeah, this bot lane's super dominant. Closer and Abadage work super well together. There's really not a lot to say about this team that hasn't already been said, right? Jungle mid is one of the strongest in the league. Bot lane's one of the strongest in the league. Someday, while he's quote-unquote on the downturn of his career, still is one of the better top laners in the league and is certainly one of the more consistent top laners in the league. This guy just doesn't lose lane. It's kind of how he's always been, right? Is even when he's not the focal point of the map, he's going to be up 5, 8, 10 CS because he's just better in lane than everybody else he's going up against. And he's a good team fighter as well. I love his flank team fighting picks. His Aatrox, his Gnar. I think those things are so strong on Someday, those picks. And I think while they're not the best in the meta right now, either way, you could pull it out on 100 Thieves and it would work, right? It's hard to kind of categorize what I feel about this team that hasn't already been said, but I think really where this team is different and where they kind of shine is in their lack of a weakness, right? You look from 1 to 5, and they don't have a bad or a quote-unquote weak player on this team. If you give anybody on this team resources, they can carry the game. Maybe with the exception of Huhi, but obviously you're not getting resources to support. But even then, Huhi solo wins some games for this 100 Thieves team on Leona, which he's just ridiculously good on, right? I think that's your biggest benefit of this 100 Thieves team is they are really good in every single role. They have no weakness on the team, but they're not necessarily the best at any one thing, unless, like I said, Abadage has this massive breakout season. But we'll see. We'll see one way or the other about it. I just think this 100 Thieves team is so ridiculously consistent, so ridiculously good. I don't want to go on too long about them because you've probably heard a lot about them last year. I talked about this team last year. Yeah, they're phenomenal. I expect them to continue being one of the best teams in the entire league. The consensus has them at 2, as high as number 1, but as low as number 3. So, yeah, I do agree that this team probably, I could see this team being the best team in spring. Because, again, they've changed nothing. This is a team that won LCS last year, and they've changed absolutely nothing. So, I should point out, actually, I haven't mentioned it yet. Someday in the top lane is probably the starter, but they are running a 6-man roster here with Tenacity, and Tenacity is really, really good. There is a chance that Tenacity can come in and play, quote-unquote better than Someday. They have very different play styles. Someday is very much a sword and shield dynamic that I think we've seen in the past with, with Impact and Ray back on Cloud9. I think is the most obvious example of that in the LCS, but Someday kind of being the shield and Tenacity being the sword, being this really aggressive top laner that they can bring in to play these more aggressive picks like the Jace. Things like that I think Tenacity is more proficient at, but either way, they're going to get a top-level top lane performance, I think, out of either of those guys. And if Tenacity can really be good enough to, take a spot from Someday, then he absolutely deserves to, if he's good enough to take that spot, then he's going to be a top 4, 3 top laner in the region anyways. So it's not really going to matter, right? They have a good top lane room no matter what happens, because even if Tenacity isn't good, Someday is going to be good. I can guarantee that. And if Tenacity is better than Someday, that means that Tenacity is, really, really good. So a lot of good to look out here for 100 Thieves. Obviously, the consistency is the biggest key, and changing no members just feels kind of OP for Spring Split. That's going to lead us into our number 1 team in the power rankings, and if you're keeping track, you know who number 1 is, because we revealed all the other 9. Number 1 in my power rankings here for 2022 Spring Split LCS is going to be Team Liquid. They've created a super team. They've created a 5-headed monster here that I'm happy to go over. In the top lane, it's going to be Bwipo. In the jungle, Santorin. Mid lane is the returning king, Bjergsen himself. Bot lane is Hansama. And then support is Core JJ. Wow, what an awesome, awesome lineup this is. It's actually ridiculous what they've actually been able to put together here. Money-wise, this must cost an absolute fortune, but it doesn't matter, right? Because they're too good. Let's talk about the positives, right? You're keeping 2 members from this team last year, Core JJ and Santorin. Core JJ is the best support NA has ever seen. That is period. That is no cap. He is the 3rd best player that NA has ever had behind Doublelift and Bjergsen. Core JJ is in that list. I don't really care what anybody says. I know a lot of people are going to be mad at that. Sneaky's in there, obviously. But for me, Core JJ is that guy. He's the 3rd best player that NA has ever seen. And, yeah, he does everything well. He's a good laner. He's the best roaming support in the West, without question. And, there's really not a weakness to his game. He's a great shot caller. The really only question mark about Core JJ is whether or not he's going to play. Because he doesn't have a green card yet, quote unquote. We haven't heard any announcement of a green card. We know they're working tirelessly to get this guy a green card before the season starts, because they do have 2 imports already here in Bwipo and Hansama that they bring in this offseason. So Core JJ needs to be considered a resident to be able to play. If he's not able to play early on, that does probably affect this team's power ranking output. I'd probably put them closer to 2nd, at least for regular season. But if we're taking playoffs into account, if Core JJ's back at all for playoffs, which I assume that's pretty much guaranteed, at least from what I'm hearing, then this team should win the Spring Split, right? Because on paper, they are just too good. But yeah, if Ayla's playing earlier in the season, maybe they drop a few games earlier. Ayla's still a pretty darn good player, but maybe they, he's not Core JJ, so maybe they drop a little bit early. But outside of that, that's really the only weakness you have with Core JJ. Santorin also returning here. Your standard, by the numbers, supportive style jungler. Santorin is really, really good at that role, at being, the Trundle or whatever else you need, the Volley Bear, right? That jungler you can pick and just gank early, get your lanes ahead, and then have them carry you. That's what Santorin loves to do, and you've got a lineup essentially full of players that are rarely mechanically talented. Yes, none of them, or I guess not all of them, have that carry mentality in their head, but that's definitely something I think you can develop, and I think when you have a player like Santorin, I think that's only going to help the situation. You're also bringing back the king. Bjergsen leaves TSM, joins TL. I hope I'm not blowing anybody's minds right now, but if I am, I'm so sorry. Bjergsen's on Team Liquid now. He was, a great coach last year, first in the regular season. And then now he's coming back here to hopefully regain his throne. He was really good at the end of lock-in. This guy just has incredible mechanics. He has incredible mechanics. He's, why am I hyping up Bjergsen like you don't know who he is? He's got great team fighting instincts, and he's willing to sacrifice his own lane to help other lanes get ahead. And I think that could be really beneficial in this meta right now, where getting ahead in the bot lane is actually really consequential towards getting early objectives. And I think Bjergsen's one of those players that I think would be happy to say, okay, if getting ahead bot lane helps the entire team, I'm happy to help bot lane get super far ahead. So let's talk about the imports, shall we? Bwipo and Hans Sama, both coming in from the LEC. Let's talk about Hans first, because he is nuts. Hans was the best AD carry in the LEC last year on Rogue. I don't really have a big debate for that, right? Like, him and Upset, you could kind of argue. I think Hans Sama was better. Hans Sama's laning phase is, while he's never the most aggressive laner, he is never, ever in a position to lose lane. And he's always up like 10 or 15 CS. I think his laning phase is secretly super underrated, even if it's not flashy. And then he's just a phenomenal team fighter on pretty much everybody he plays, right? Most bot laners have a style bot laner that they tend to go to kind of dominate in team fights or to really take over a game. I feel like Hans can do it on pretty much everybody, although he does like the mobile AD carries a little bit more. Your Tristanas, your Ezreals. Kind of, it's what I think of when I think of Hans Sama. But either way, he's still really good. I think in this meta where bot lane hyper carries are so strong, your Jinxes, your Aphelioses, I think Hans Sama could, I'll say it right now, he's my favorite to win the MVP of the LCS this year. I think he's absolutely going to pop off. I know I've heard a lot of discourse about how nobody on this team really has that carry mentality. I think Hans Sama is really going to step up and take that carry mentality for this team in 2022. Or at least I hope he does, because he definitely has the skill to do it. And then you bring in Bwipo, the most supportive, glue piece in a team that you could possibly have. Great locker room atmosphere. Great shot caller. Bwipo's perfect for this roster. He's a perfect weak side top laner. Doesn't need resources, but is too mechanically good to ever really lose. Has kind of a unique champion pool as well, which can kind of help free up some other picks from, if there's power picks in the bot lane, you can early pick that without having to worry about top. If there's power picks in the jungle, etc., right? You can kind of play around that in the draft when your top laner has such an expansive top pool, champion pool. And Bwipo definitely has that. If there is a knock on Bwipo, it's the fact that when he does get resources, he doesn't necessarily turn that into gigantic leads for his team, but you have plenty of guys on this team who do that naturally. Players like Bjergsen and Hans Sama, I think, aren't going to struggle with that. This team is perfect in roster construction. The consensus has them at number 1, only as low as number 2. This team is just too good to finish outside of the top 2. If they do, something has gone seriously wrong. Even if Ayla plays the entire split, to me, this team is still at worst second. Even if Ayla played the entire split, I still might have them as favorites to win the LCS, but they're just that good. They don't have a weakness. Their quote-unquote weakness is the fact that they have a lot of players that are supportive, but, Hans Sama is a carry player. He can be. Bjergsen, we know, can be a carry player. Core JJ, hell, can be a carry player, right? I'm not worried about that argument, right, of nobody on this team is really going to take the mantle. I firmly believe this team is just going to be the best team in the LCS, and maybe one of the best teams that the LCS has ever seen. All right, that is going to do it for my 2022 Spring Split LCS Power Rankings and Predictions video. Up on the screen right now, you are going to be seeing where I personally power rank all of the players in their position. You've seen it throughout the video, but now you get a little bit more of a view on that. And then transitioning over now is going to be my power rankings along with the consensus power rankings for all of the teams. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does mean a lot to the channel and to me. I put a lot of effort into these videos, and if you guys enjoy them, it would really do me, a huge favor if you guys could leave a like. Comment on who you guys think is going to be kind of an underrated team, maybe an overrated team, your opinions, your power rankings, all that stuff in the comment section below. I love chatting it up with you guys. You know I do. So, yeah, I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.